1 minute warning, 1 minute warning. We will be live in 1 minute with America Free Radio on the Revolution Radio Network. We're working on it, Earth Explorers. Hang in there. We're waiting on the trailer to start at the Revolution Radio Network. Okay, I guess no radio leader, so we will just start with the program. Wait, I hear something in the background. Well, I can't tell if we're live yet or not. Just a little bit of pre-Christmas technical difficulties. This is X Squared Radio, coming to you live on the America Free Radio Network from an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. My name is Brooks Agnew, and we're live on the Revolution Radio Network. So I'm so glad that you are here with us. We are also simulcasting on YouTube Live. So if you want to go to youtube.com/Brooks Agnew, you can join us. And we are live. And the chat room is filling up, and so is the listener. I want to start a little bit tonight with a science story, because I think we've had just about enough of that impeachment stuff today. So we're going to talk about that as little as possible, unless you want me to give you my thoughts on it. When Jack Sarfati was 13 years old, he began receiving phone calls from a strange metallic voice that told him he would someday become part of an elite group of scientists exploring uncharted territory. Those calls, which he believes may have come from a computer on a spacecraft, proved a seminal influence on his life and led him to pursue a career that combined mainstream physics with an enduring interest in UFOs and the far-out reaches of science. For those who might dismiss Sarfati as a crank, he is quick to point out that he is not interested in debating the reality of little green men, but rather whether the existence of UFOs might prove that the technology required for interstellar travel is possible. I quote, "It's the physics that interests me," says Sarfati, who received his PhD in the subject from the University of California. That experience and interest also helped make Sarfati one of the key figures invited last year to help formulate an unusual government program. The program was called For 100-Year Starship, otherwise known as the 100YSS. While the U.S. government's manned space programs appear stuck in Earth's orbit, this audacious project aims to kickstart efforts towards interstellar space travel, journeys over vast distances to stars outside of our solar system. It is driven by ideas that range from ensuring the survival of the human species and searching for the intelligent life to the desire to overhaul space propulsion and just pure academic endeavor. Science fiction favorites, from wormholes and warp drives to light speed and lasers, are all on the table. Pretty cool place, huh? It means part of the project can end up sounding like the wish list for an episode of Star Trek. But the 100YSS is not a fringe activity started by a bunch of dreamers. It has the backing of two high-profile U.S. agencies, the Space Agency, NASA, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA. They both have a lot of money. The U.S. military agency that helped create the internet and satellite-based navigation. DARPA has a track record for these kinds of seemingly impossible technologies. In recent years, it has sponsored attempts to develop a hypersonic aircraft and driverless cars. Some people wonder, why in the world would you want a driverless car? Who wants to sleep from Chicago to New York? Yeah, that's kind of the sales point, isn't it? But the reality is that the money comes from DARPA. My friends up at in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they worked for Lotus Engineering. They won the contest that year for automatic driving or self-driving cars. All kinds of map reading and obstacle corrections and speed corrections. They won the contest, and they didn't spend but about $100,000 to do it. Well, now, of course, it's much, much more advanced. You think there really is a big enough market for self-driving cars? I don't think so. The reason that those technologies were driven was because DARPA was the money behind it. And what they looked for were smart people that could write the programming, cars that could be adapted to townscapes and countryscapes and all kinds of different driving conditions as an experimental base so that they could develop robotic weapon systems that could literally drive through city streets and negotiate everything. They're not there yet. But a lot of the robotics and rover technologies that they're developing come from that program. So even those might pale next to the goal of sending a manned spaceship to the stars, and the agency's willingness to embrace unconventional ideas and people like Sarfati. It means the project divides opinion. For its backers, it is a visionary blueprint for interstellar travel. For the naysayers, it is a crackpot idea with no hope of even getting off of the ground. For those who might consider a starship something of a movie pipe dream, David Nayland, the head of the DARPA office in charge of the 100YSS, points to the agency's ability to spur innovation in unexpected areas, an ability that has proven critical to its success. The iPhone in your pocket is powered by cellular radio technology that came out of communications research DARPA did back in the 70s and 80s, says Nayland. So it is that unintended consequence of technology, research, that we are hoping to inspire. Of course, when it comes to spaceships, we've been here before. serious study of interstellar travel has long attracted a coterie of dedicated followers spanning mainstream science and the outer fringes. Werner von Braun, the famous rocket scientist, justified his work on military weapons as a way to further engineering that would lead mankind to space. "I aimed to the stars, but sometimes I hit London," became a satirical jab at von Braun, whose dreams of travel to Mars led him to build the V-2 rockets for Nazi Germany that rained down on England during World War II. The moon landings reinvigorated interest in manned space travel. In the 1970s, the British Interplanetary Society led a 5-year study called Project Daedalus, named for the mythological figure who crafted wings to fly. The group looked at building a nuclear fusion-powered starship to travel some 6 light years away to Barnard's star, a star reasonably close to Earth, which was then thought to have orbiting planets. Interest also grew in novel propulsion methods, driven in part by the idea that controversial rocket technology was just too slow to mount even a one-way trip to our closest stellar neighbor, Alpha Centauri. Some estimates suggested it would take at least 80,000 years to travel the 4 light years there, requiring multi-generational spaceflight and fuel demands that do not bear thinking about. Hence, interest grew in technologies such as solar sails, blown along by streams of light particles. In the 1980s, physicist Robert L. Forward even proposed a solar sail driven by a giant laser, which would push a spacecraft at close to the speed of light, although some consider even that technology too slow for interstellar exploration. Writing about those ideas is one thing, and Lord knows there have been a lot of books written about it. I recall one, I don't even know how many years it was. It's called Footfall. Yeah, it was a pretty cool book about a kind of technology like that. Lasers shooting from the ground into the nozzle, straight into the nozzle of a rocket, basically gasifying a metal inside that cavity, which would then launch out the nozzles in the bottom of the rocket and propel it into space. So the only thing that the rocket had to carry on it was the metal inside, and the laser would actually be shot from the ground. And as long as the craft stayed aligned with the laser, then it would launch out into space. Interesting technology. We have never actually tried it that I know of. Let's see, building these things, of course, is another story, says Mark Lewis, a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Maryland and a former U.S. Air Force chief scientist. The laser-powered light sail, for example, would require planet-size optics as big as Jupiter. One can write the equations to demonstrate how it could be done, but the resources need to actually, they're off the charts, what it would take to put that together. We know how to build them, but that doesn't mean we could build them or we would build them. If somebody builds something that big, it could just as easily be used as a weapon to pick satellites out of orbit, like, flies with a lightsaber. Nearly 3 decades later, Dr. Forward's laser-powered light sail, as well as other ideas for interstellar travel, are still popular among space enthusiasts and science fiction writers, but they have gained little traction by way of funding or serious progress. In the 1990s, NASA briefly supported the Breakthrough Propulsion Physics program, which funded scientific research in areas such as rocketless space drives and faster-than-light travel. However, that program lost its funding in 2002. You see, advancing these ideas would require decades of research and billions of dollars. The country that tried it would either go broke or would tilt the balance of technology so wildly on this planet that it would spin things into instability. Right now, the established aerospace community is reaching a stagnation point. It's kind of, we're still putting astronauts in a can and lighting a candle underneath them and launching them into space. That's really old school, but it's just the way that we do it. What we use for fuel, whether it's solid boosters or whether it's hydrogen peroxide or propane or whatever it is, it's still the same technology. It's still risky. It's still wasteful. And it's unlikely that there's going to be a breakthrough anytime soon. Not with the kind of thrust that it takes to get off our planet and into orbit and beyond. Now, Mark Millis, who's a former NASA scientist who headed the Breakthrough Propulsion Physics program, he left NASA in 2010. But he now dedicates his time to the Tau Zero Foundation, an Ohio-based nonprofit he started to help further interstellar travel. Pretty cool. He says, I tried to keep doing cool, futuristic stuff, but it's just not going to happen in government, he said. I realized I'm going to have to go independent. Just too many people looking over the shoulder, too many people cutting budgets, too many people saying, hey, couldn't we use that to blow stuff up? And he had to go private. Now, ironically, the same thinking is what motivated DARPA and NASA to start the 100YSS. Nayland, the DARPA official I told you about, says the idea for the project came out of a meeting he had with head of NASA's Ames Research Center. His name is Pete Worden, who has a reputation of out-of-the-box thinking and willing to take risks, kind of like me. Their idea was to make a system for interstellar travel, kind of the way the Medici court did for Galileo, kind of provide long-term funding to encourage scientific breakthroughs. In January of 2011, DARPA and NASA convened a handful of people, including Sarfati, to help shape the project. It was decided that the government would provide a modest seed fund of just $500,000, a drop in the ocean compared to DARPA's annual budget of about $3 billion, which that's just the budget that's on the books. I have it on good authority. DARPA has access to some $89 billion a year. Not all of it for space research, but that's still a hell of a budget. Anyway, to a foundation that could demonstrate its ability to advance thinking on interstellar travel. DARPA believes the chosen group will then find new sources of revenue, either through commercialization technologies for this kind of short stepping, or what we call CisLunar or CisMars technology, and private donations. And of course, if there are a few spin-off technologies that DARPA, whose main customer is the U.S. Department of Defense, stuff that blows stuff up, then of course you got a ready buyer right away. And if they can't pay for it, well, Saudi Arabia can pay for it, right? The 100 years part, according to Nayland, was merely an estimate of how long it would take to really move such an ambitious project forward. But that's assuming no breakthroughs. If a breakthrough happens, like a new energy source or some, gravity lens or some way to produce thrust without having to carry fuel, a breakthrough like that, then all bets are off. Then it's Katie bar the door. Now, if you even look at our own space program, if you look at how far we've come, it's been ostensibly 41 years since we landed on the moon, right? I know some of you don't believe that, but be that as it may, 41 years, okay? So we thought a 100-year time horizon, not for the study, but 100 years of doing research and development gave us some practicality of developing technologies that we just can't foresee today. I mean, if you take that budget of $3 billion a year for 100 years, that's $300 billion. But what if and I've always proposed this idea. What if we took the defense budget? You know what the defense budget is, right? It's like, gosh, pretty close to what, $1 trillion, like $700 billion. You know, we use it to build F-35s and aircraft carriers and submarines and rockets, missiles, and grenades and train troops, right? What would happen if we just said, okay, that's enough iron. We got enough planes, we got enough tanks, we got enough rockets, we got enough cannons, we got enough nukes to do the job. Nobody could stand up against us. And what would happen if we took the entire upgrade defense budget, let's say $500 billion. That still leaves $300 billion to kind of keep the military greased, and oiled. $500 billion per year. And we dumped it all into the space program. Well, first of all, a couple things would happen. The first thing that would happen, I think, is that all that empty factory space that is just down the road from you, it would fill up. It would fill up in a hurry. Yep. All that space in New Jersey, all that space in Nebraska, all that space in Fresno, California, it would all fill up because there'd be money to make stuff. The second thing that would happen, I think, of course, the universities would have to gear up. Hey, we need to have smart people that know how to do like math and stuff. Yeah, it would. A lot of people get excited about it. But the second thing that would happen is the other nations of the world. We spend so much money on military and stuff. You have to wonder, we spend more than what the next 12 or 15 nations combined spend on national defense? And like 9 of them are our allies. I mean, yeah, we're paying part of the bill for them to be involved in NATO and all that stuff. Yeah. But what do you think would happen? What do you think their generals and their parliaments and their congresses would do if we did it? I know you're a little bit behind me in the chat room, but I can tell you my thoughts. I think what they would say, hey, what do they know that we don't know? Why did they make this radical decision that they're taking like 3/4 of their defense budget and they're dumping it into rockets and into spacecraft and into space stations and lunar bases and deep space launch systems? What do they know that we don't know? And if they're doing it, I mean, shouldn't we be doing it too? I mean, don't you think Russia would say that? Don't you think China would say that? I mean, do you think China would be worried so much about Taiwan? Do you think they'd be worried so much about Hong Kong? Or would they be really worried about the moon? Would they be really worried about Mars? Because I can tell you right now, and I'm dead on this, I guarantee you, he who controls the moon will control the earth. It's called the high ground. We control the skies. We control the country. We control space. We control the planet. First one there wins. And what would happen is the entire focus of us fighting over dirt or religion on this rock in space would shift. It would change. Everybody's eyes would be looking up. Everybody's goals would become much longer. It would have much longer timelines. It would be much more practical. We would be looking at planning out 20, 50, 200 years in the future. The way a planet who is bent on survival should do. I mean, the idea of a suicide mission to one of these planets, it doesn't excite anybody, okay? If you look at our space program right now, you look how far we've come. It is not very far in 41 years. In fact, many would argue it kind of gone backwards. When Obama retired the space shuttle fleet, it was like, hey, what's up? We're having to hitch a ride with the Russians to different places. Aren't they like our enemies? Aren't they messing with us all the time? You know, we're fighting all this about Russian collusion and on, and yet we're cooperating in space. Does that make any sense to anybody? We're paying all this money to NATO. We're positioning cannons and tanks and nukes and everything around Russia to protect Europe against Russia. And yet Europe buys natural gas from Russia. They buy technology from Russia. They trade with Russia all the time. Does that make any sense to anybody? It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. You know, Ronald Reagan once said, the only thing that would bring this world together as on one side of the fence is if we had a common enemy, like maybe an alien race is going to invade the earth. Now, a lot of people took that to say, oh no, an alien race is going to invade the earth. Or they're going to do some false flag and, you know, make it sound like we got an alien race that's going to invade earth. And so we all need to unite as one. And even if that were true, which I doubt that it is, I think we'd still be slapping each other. I think we'd still be picking each other's pockets. But what if we weren't facing a common enemy? What if we were facing a common goal? You know, getting away from this suicide mission. By the way, the news is just in. President Donald Trump has been impeached. Yes, it's true. 23 radical Democrats have abused their power, taken over Congress, and basically done a quid quo pro and blackmailed all of the Democrats to vote to impeach Donald Trump. It's a disaster. We'll talk about it a little bit in the next hour, but it's going to be, we're witnessing the actual end of the Democrat Party. In another 11 months, there won't be a DNC. So you might as well get thinking about another party. Think about the Constitution Party or the Green Asphalt Party or something, but the DNC is done. Whoever it is that commanded them to do this wanted them destroyed because they just committed suicide. All right. The idea of a suicide mission to space was not quite what these two agencies had in mind. They want to do something to expand into space, not to die there. So NASA has been, taking a step back, allowing DARPA, who has even hired a public relations firm to handle publicity for the project. I'm not part of it, trust me. Despite that initial misstep, a conference open to the public held late last year proved actually popular. People liked it. Science fiction people liked it. Scientists liked it. I liked it. At a panel on breakthrough propulsion, an audience eager to hear about warp drive and faster-than-light drive spilled out of the room and into the hallway. You can imagine. And there was a lot of technology that was placed on the table and a lot of technology that was tested. And I have to tell you, it was a little frustrating because there was technology that was sent there that didn't get tested. It just sat on the bench because it was just too far out. I mean, we were looking for a fuel tank and there wasn't one. And, sometimes you get these theoretical papers come in, these abstracts come in, and it's like, look, you just apply electricity to it and it will provide thrust. And the current scientists look at it and go, yeah, well, listen, thanks for coming in today. And I really hate it, but there's no refund on the application fee, but thanks for coming in anyway. It was nice meeting you. But the inventors kept writing, and the inventors kept challenging. And finally, the guys at JPL had nothing better to do. And they said, all right. Look, we got the bench space. Just hook the darn thing up and wire it up and let's just see what happens. So no fuel tanks, no nothing, just hook it up to electricity. And so they did. And even though they didn't follow the instructions exactly, because the inventors weren't there to show them how to balance everything, the darn thing made 50 micronewtons of thrust. 50 micronewtons of thrust. Now, that's not a lot of thrust. That's not enough thrust to lift this bottle of eye drops. But the fact that it made any thrust at all made a lot of people scratch their heads. And a lot of people look at the theory. This thing was importing particles from another dimension. Yeah, from another dimension using the Casimir effect. Casimir effect is basically two very, very finely machined metal plates very close to one another. Not quite touching, but very close to one another. And then put into a vacuum. And that a charge is placed on these plates. And when that happens, mysteriously, in between these plates appear particles from we don't really know where. When I was talking with Dr. Fred Robb, who runs the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory in Hanford, Washington, he tried to explain this to me, and I had to have him repeat it because I said, wait a minute, Fred, are you telling me what I think you're telling me, that we're importing particles from another dimension into the third dimension, into this dimension, and we're actually doing work with them? And he said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That is a real mind blower. Well, what the inventors of this motor, it was called the Canna motor, like Cannae. Why did they call it that? It's out of Star Trek. It's out of Star Trek. It's what Scotty would say when the captain would call down and say, Scotty, I need more power. And he would say, I cannot do it. I'm giving it all she's got. That's where the name came, the Canna motor. Anyway, the Canna motor was generating thrust by importing particles from another dimension into our dimension and then thrusting them out the rear of the unit. And they were making 50 micronewtons of thrust, because for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The only thing is, no fuel was required. Yep, there was no hexane, no hydrazine, nothing was required to make this thrust. We usually put hydrazine for retro rockets, and we pack enough on it. It's a dry chemical. And what happens is the dry chemical is piezoelectrically puffed into a catalytic converter. The catalytic converter catalyzes the oxidation of the hydrazine, and poof, you get a thrust. That's the way they work. And when the craft runs out of hydrazine, it runs out of thrust. What we're talking about is a thruster that works just off of electricity. So if you've got solar panels outstretched and you're getting energy from a star, you have thrust. Now, I did the calculations and sent them to the company, and I said, look, these things have to be pretty big. They have to be 30 feet in diameter, 30 feet in diameter, and there need to be 3 of them, like a cluster of 3 big discs. And each one of these would have a nozzle on the end of it and would generate enough thrust to push a reasonable size spaceship or a big satellite with about half a G of thrust. That's not very much. That's about 16 feet per second. Now, what that means, of course, is that now you have artificial gravity. You can actually, just like, I know that space series on Amazon called The Expanse. You'd have artificial gravity because you'd have continuous thrust. You'd have F is equal to ma, force is equal to mass times acceleration. You would have thrust, or you would have a gravity based upon the continuous thrust of that thruster. Now, if you left the thruster on at half a G for about 3 weeks, you could achieve incredible speeds. like of 1,000,000 miles an hour, maybe more. And once it got to that speed, now you're talking, instead of traveling 90 million miles in 6 months, you're talking about 2 days. Yeah, it's a big, big difference, 2 or 3 days. Now, when you get to that speed, you just maintain that speed or keep accelerating as long as the star will carry you until you get to the next star system. And then you turn the ship around, just like in The Expanse, and you decelerate at about the same G-force. In doing that, you take 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to get back to zero. In that period of time, you'd also have artificial gravity. So now you have thrust that could take a ship from our star system to another star system in less than 7 years, maybe 10 years. That's doable. That's something we can do. That's like Voyager, Voyager 1, Voyager 2 time period. We can make that happen. If you get a bigger thruster, like maybe on the back of a starship, you can get more thrust out of it. Pretty interesting idea. So anyway, this symposium also covered the ethical, medical, and even religious aspects of interstellar space travel. Adam Crowell, who's a board member of Project Icarus, an organization dedicated to interstellar travel, proposed a possible escape mission for a spaceship to ensure mankind's survival in case of a catastrophe on Earth. In his proposal, with echoes of sci-fi like Battlestar Galactica and Wall-E, involved sending embryos into space to be raised by androids. It is a theoretical exercise in looking at the risks to humanity from our own inventions. What we might do is provide a fallback option. And there are other ideas as well. Instead of traveling to another star system, we just travel within our own solar system. We're already looking at the moon. We have ideas on the inside of the moon. Some of those volcanic vents look pretty attractive to me. We have Mars, which is at the closest about 50 million miles away, at the furthest about 80 or 90 million miles away. Mars has an atmosphere a little like the top of Mount Everest, pretty cold, pretty thin. We'd have to do a lot of terraforming. It could take 50 to 100 years to get the surface of Mars to where it could sustain a human for any period of time without artificial breathing. That being said, we have the ability to build shelter. And if we put those shelters on those planets, we could survive quite easily. If you think, well, that's really radical, who would want to do that? Well, look at our lives now. We live only 15% of our time outside. Unless you're a construction worker or a landscaper where you're outside working all day, most of us spend only 15% out of doors. 85% of our time is indoors. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, our human bodies aren't really made for life in the open. Our skin can't take sunlight for very long. We don't have enough hair on our bodies to protect us against cold. We don't have, claws for digging, and we don't have teeth for tearing, and we don't have legs for running very fast. I don't run anymore unless there's a ball involved. I'm just telling you that the human body is rather frail when it comes to this planet, and it would be frail compared to other planets as well. But the difference is that on this planet, we can survive on the surface, and on other worlds, we could not. We would have to live in shelter or under the surface. And I think, when it comes to looking at worlds out there, we've looked far and wide. There are not many planets where you can live on the surface, but there are planets that we can live off the surface. Venus, we could live in the atmosphere. Enceladus, one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn or Uranus or any of those, we could probably live on the inside of those planets. I'm just saying, there are ways of doing it. If we want to apply the technology, we want to take mankind out beyond Earth. I hope that we learn to get along, but if Nancy Pelosi's whipping the Democrat Party in such a fashion to split America in half, actually in half. You got 80 million Americans on one side, and you got Democrats on the other side. Again, since 1848, they've been doing this, splitting the nation apart and forcing it into a civil war. Maybe we need to go to another planet. One faction or the other, either all Democrats or all Americans, one way or another, we need to divide up because it's obvious we can't get along here. The project has also tried to raise its credibility by including a range of skeptics, particularly on the propulsion ideas. Ken Olam, who's a physicist at Tufts University in Boston, he took part in the Breakthrough Propulsion panel at DARPA Symposium. He says that schemes like wormholes and warp drives are interesting to discuss, but they're just not practical. For one thing, we don't know how to build them. We think that they exist out there, but even so, we don't know how to navigate them. What are you going to do? Send a probe through and the probe ends up, in the next galaxy somewhere? How do you get feedback? How do you find out where the probe went? You don't know. And you can't follow it because you don't know what path it took. It might mean a lot exactly where you negotiate this wormhole as to where you come out on the other side. We just don't know. He says, even though I think that there's not likely to be much future in exotic stuff like wormholes, I think a little bit of funding should be given to them. Do some research. But they're not the answer to the problem of what will we do in the next 100 years. I think that's probably right. Like I said, it's going to take some kind of breakthrough, some kind of almost accidental discovery to accelerate that timeline. And that's the way it normally comes, by the way. Now, Leavitt, the NASA scientist, says these sorts of breakthrough propulsion ideas, however far-fetched, have to be considered because they are the only way mankind could conceivably cover the vast distances to other stars. Nuclear fusion, if you're willing to have a 1,000-year mission, is worth talking about. But I tend to agree with Jack Sarfati on this. In order to do this, we have to have a breakthrough. We have to have a warp drive. Leavitt, who was the one who invited Sarfati to the initial 100-year Starship meeting, says unusual interests shouldn't make someone off limits unless they really smell bad. Mainstreams or have green scales. That's kind of off limits too, I think. Mainstream scientists are tied down, argues Leavitt, and someone like Sarfati is free to talk about ideas like anti-gravity propulsion without fear of repercussions on his career. Although his interests and styles are outside of the mainstream, he's a fully pedigreed physicist, and he knows as much or more than mainstream physicists. When we talk about warp drives, he knows what he's talking about. He knows he's speculating. Now, in December of 2011, DARPA selected a team led by Mae Jemison. It's the first African-American woman to travel to space as the winner of a $500,000 grant. Jemison, whose partners included the Icarus Foundation and the Foundation for Enterprise Development, won with a proposal called An Inclusive. That's what the proposal was called. This would transform life here on Earth and beyond. Now, while details of what Jemison and her team intend to do are unclear, the news could spell the death of another interstellar travel foundation. Millis, the head of the Tau Zero Foundation, said he would have to consider shutting down his operations. There are not enough revenues around to try to compete. I think that would be a disservice to the community. Sarfati sees it differently, or Sarfati. After spending most of his career as an outsider pursuing faster-than-light travel, he is undaunted by the arrival of a government-backed competitor. Instead, he has shunned the 100YSS process and plans to continue work on his warp drive independently. If he disappears, I guess we know what happened. The DARPA project, he says, is simply too little money to be taken seriously. I'm in touch with people with considerable resources, he said. I'll do it on my own and do whatever I want to do. Well, we may have to wait 100 years to see if he's proven right, but I kind of doubt it. I think things are going to accelerate pretty quickly, no pun intended. And I'll tell you where my mind is at on this. When I was in the 8th grade, I was one of the top math students in Southern California. And I was interviewed by a newspaper. A newspaper lady came by and asked me a bunch of questions. And I remember one of the questions she asked me was, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a reasonable question to ask a 13-year-old. And I said, well, I want to be an asteroid miner. And that kind of took her back because, we hadn't even been to the moon yet. I'm just saying that it takes vision like that. Now, if you look at the series, The Expanse, and by the way, if you haven't started watching it, I'm not going to wait up on you because I only got 15 minutes in this segment, but you should watch it. It is really hardcore science fiction. In the sense that not all of it is fiction. All of it is doable. All the technology, all the science in it is the leading edge physics that we're talking about right here in this article. Not only that, the acting is very good, and the screenwriting is very good, and the storyline is very good, because what happens is you end up with these factions. Okay, you have 4 of them. Earth, which at the time of the story has about 20 billion people living on it. There's one overall governing body called the United Nations, which is not even close to the United Nations that you have today, with the Secretary General running everything, with its own military. And then you have Luna, which obviously this is the lunar colony, and their access to helium-3 as an energy source. And then you have the Martians. Obviously, it's a long-term project, over 100 years. And what they're trying to do is terraform Mars as kind of the dream of maybe 3 generations away. They're going to reap the benefits of what we're doing. Mars and Luna don't have a lot of natural resources, and so they need this 4th faction. And what do you think the 4th faction is? They're the asteroid miners. In fact, they form a faction that are actually called the Belters. Now, the Belters are really independent-minded entrepreneurs that go out and carve up asteroids, everything from titanium to gold to, rare earth metals and ice. Yes, ice. They're ice miners. Because of these huge ice asteroids that are out there, they can carve them up for water. And not just water for the Belters, enough water for the Luna and enough water for the Mars. And so they're supplying these other 2 factions. They're called inners, right? Inners are people inside the asteroid belt. The Belters are on the outside, obviously, because the asteroid belt is outside of Mars. So you have the inners and you have the Belters who have a conflict with one another, because the Belters are the one that take the risk. The Belters are the ones that are the grunts, so to speak. Not really military people, but, kind of like colonists. And they're out there and they have their own ship and they have their own squabbles and they have their own piracies. And they also have their own organized crime organizations called the OPA. Now, all 4 of these factions are in conflict with one another. The Martians don't trust Earth. Earth doesn't trust Luna. Earth doesn't trust the Belters. The Belters don't trust anybody. Guess what? It's just like human nature. And that therein lies the conflict. The conflict is what creates the script and creates the action and creates the tension in the overall story. It's anytime you tell a story, you got to have an antagonist, or you got to have an unsurmountable challenge. And the unsurmountable challenge is space. And of course, it's limited. At one time, Earth was limited, and then it went to the moon, and then Earth was and the moon were limited, and they went to Mars, and then those two were limited, and they went to the belt, and that's about as far as they've gone until the fourth season. In the fourth season, an alien race, which is long since extinct, leaves their technology behind, and they discover 1,300 stargates. Yes, this ring is built inside the solar system, and now all these ships, all these civilizations are looking for a way to go to the new frontier. And that is human nature as well, because in the past, up until now, the same forces have ruled the earth since man has been on the planet. And for thousands and thousands of years, this same force has ruled the world. And as luck would have it, or as time would have it, each time the race would become oppressed and have their freedoms taken away from them, or they would get a taste of freedom, they would push out further to the wilderness. The last frontier was America. America had an ancient civilization on it. That ancient civilization went to war with itself. The survivors of that war were the Native Americans. Not much left behind because all the people that knew how to do stuff were dead, so they became nomadic. And then the new settlers came over and got a taste of freedom and decided to separate themselves off from Europe and conquered the residual race that was already here. Same story, same story. And then over a period of 242 years, the old race, the one that ruled the world for thousands of years, wanted it back. They wanted it back in 1787. They fought. They lost. They wanted it back in 1812. They fought to a stalemate. They wanted it back in 1913 and pulled them into World War I, took a pause, resumed the war in 1939, took it all the way to 1945 when 2 nuclear bombs ended it temporarily. We stayed at war, and we're at war today. Not the same kind of war that we were fighting before, because the war, instead of working with big armies, because now the weapons are so just devastating, the armies turned in. The armies turned in. They went inside the state. And so from 1933 until 2019, tonight, the old order, twisted and evil and without freedom and without liberty, decided to take over the country. And they did. Tonight, they took over the country and they impeached a president which America had elected. And now there is a huge rally with 50,000 people added up in Michigan, dwarfing anything that has been organized ever in this country, ever before. And they are rocking for this president because the president has done everything right. Why? Because that's the way God works. God takes flawed individuals and raises them up and gives them what they need in order to save a world. For 20 years, almost 20 years, this country was oppressed, suppressed. It had a huge jackboot on its neck, and it could barely breathe. And it got down to 1% growth. People had despaired for so long, an entire generation of young people lost in ignorance, lost in despair and hopelessness, lost without identity, lost without even knowing what the hell sex they were. That's how oppressed they were. And a man came along and said, this is a bunch of crap. And for 30 years, he's been saying exactly the same thing. And people have been begging him for 30 years to run for president. Finally, he decides to run for president. And all those ideas he had for the last 30 years are exactly what are needed. And he saved the world. We're back to 4 to 5% growth rate. We've got more people working now than have ever worked before. Globalism is being rebelled against all over the world, from Hong Kong to France to Venezuela to the U.S. Everywhere, globalism is being rejected, wholesale rejected. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because the old world forces moved on the inside of our government, and they corrupted it from its guts. And tonight, they took over the country. They took over the country, and they did a coup d'etat. And they have impeached our president. Maybe he'll be removed from office. Maybe he won't. Difficult to say. I can tell you this, they're not going to give up. They're not going to just let it be dismissed. Don't even fool yourself. If you don't think 70% of the Senate is compromised in some way, you're a fool, because I guarantee you they are. They've been to Epstein's Island. They've got bad debts. They've got divorces. They have girlfriends. They got all kinds of stuff going on. 70% of them are compromised and corrupt. And this old world force has unbelievable amounts of money. Tomorrow morning, $1 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion media empire is going to crush the Senate. And for the next 10 months, the only place on this planet that you're going to get the truth, that you're going to have any hope at all of saving this planet enough to even make progress into the stars, is right here on this Revolution Radio Network. And I am Brooks Agnew, and this is America Free Radio. I am the voice of the revolution. We're going to take a quick break in about 1 minute, and we'll be back for the next hour. We'll talk a little bit about asteroid mining and other interesting stuff. Don't go away, YouTubers. Hang out. Tell your friends about us. Let's double this audience. Whew, what a program. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. Well, I can't tell if we're back yet because it's one of the things about the network is I don't have access to the feed. All I get is silence on my end. So if I'm stepping on the music or if the music's stepping on me, you can let me know in the chat room. But I'm going to continue as though we're... there we go. There is music out there. So we're just talking over each other for a little bit and we'll just wait till it's done. Are we there yet? Hard to tell. Don't have the feed. Okay, let's get started anyway. I want to open up because there have been some questions in the chat room, and I want to make an announcement too here on the America Free Radio Studios on the Revolution Radio Network, and that is about the Hollow Earth. From 2006 to 2008, I was a member of the Hollow Earth Expedition team, and the transition was made from Stephen Curry, who sadly passed away in 2006, to me. Of course, the economy had something else in mind for 2008, and we worked on it for approximately 10 years until 2018, and we decided that there just was not enough money. We couldn't raise enough money to pull everything together. During that time, we did a lot of research, a lot of travel, did a lot of videos, which we have not published. And there have been a lot of copycats. A lot of people tried to capitalize on the work that I did. But recently, we have added some team members, and we're deciding now that the economy is good enough. We're going to go after this expedition for the year 2021. So the Hollow Earth expedition is on. To be part of it, you have to go to the website, which is NPIEE.com. Let me see if I can find the link. Yes, here we go. I'll put that on there right there. All right, NPIEE.com. You go to that website, and on the front page of that website is a sign-up widget. All you have to do is put your name, your country, your zip code, and your email address in there. That's it. That's all we're asking for. That information is not going to be sold. It's not going to be given to anybody. No one's going to have access to it except you and me. And over the next month, we are going to start uploading this exclusive video that we've taken from all over the world, from Everest, from Nepal, from Tibet. We were one of the last teams from the West to get into Tibet, plus a bonus, because one of the team members that we added is none other than Brad Olson. Now, Brad Olson is another intrepid explorer. He has explored almost every continent on the face of the earth. He is a travel writer. He has 9 books in print. He is well respected, well spoken all around the world, and he just got back from a 26-day expedition to the Antarctic. So we are now combining forces, Brad Olson and I, along with the rest of our team members, mostly administrative and some technological, and we are going to take off in August of 2021. Now, there's a lot of work to do between now and then. Brad has been mixing his videos down. Starting the 21st, I'm going to start mixing my videos down. They're all going to go up to a special TV channel, a special, totally exclusive TV channel. And only you will have access to it. That's right. It's not going to be on YouTube. It's not going to be publicly available. Only subscribers will have access to it. Now, over the next year, we're going to conduct a dry run in the next few months, a dry run. We're going to Moscow and then to St. Petersburg, then on to Murmansk, which is the same route that we and the 100 scientists and the film crew are going to be taking. Every hotel, all the trains, the ship, everything. We'll take videos of that all along the way. If it's possible, we'll upload that as we go. We may have the technology to be able to do that from Russia. If we don't have the technology to upload it, then we'll upload it as soon as we get back, which will be in the beginning of July. Only you will have access to that. And the only way to get to it is going to be going to npiee.com. That's it. Nobody else in the world is going to see this stuff. So all of the copycats, all the people that have tried to piggyback on top of our Hollow Earth expedition, they're not going to have access to this. Unless, of course, they want to join the expedition. I don't mind pooling resources, believe me, because this is a multi-million-dollar expedition, $5 million. So far, I'm the only one that's put all the money in. I've put in tens of thousands of my own dollars, and I don't know how many hours. Many, many thousands of man hours, not just me, but my whole team. Now, those of you that are out there thinking we're going to get rich off of this, you just keep thinking that, because that probably will not happen. But if we can get enough subscribers, and it's going to be inexpensive, we'll start with packages at $10. We get enough subscribers, I have a feeling there's about 40 million enthusiasts out there that are interested in the Hollow Earth. If I can get a 10th of those people, if I can get a 20th of those people, if I can get a 100th of those people to subscribe to this TV station, we're going to go. And here's the neat thing. We're going to stream it live from the ship. I have acquired the pathway to the satellite, and we'll have an exclusive live feed directly from the ship. Now, there's a couple ways that you can get more access. You can come to some of the live events that we have going this year. The first one we have is on the 4th of January. It is in New York. All you have to do is make your way to Hamilton, New Jersey at the Hilton Garden Inn on January 4th. It costs $20. You can meet me face to face, and we'll talk about it, and we'll get it down on paper. And you can pick up a book, and you can start your journey. You can also come to Contact in the Desert. You can come to the Human Origins Conference. How do you keep track of all this? Easy. All you have to do is go to npiee.com, or you can go to my website, which is brooksagnew.com. A lot of you already have access to that. You're already going to the YouTube channel, which is Brooks Agnew, and you've hit subscribe, right? And you've hit your notification buttons, right? Those of you that are listening live, you're participating in the chat room right now. Do you know at the bottom of that chat room, there's a little $sign there? You know what that is? Yes, that is the top chat support. You can click on that, and you can put in any amount you want, from $1 to $10,000, and it will go straight to the expedition. Everything that we take in off book sales, off of video subscriptions, everything is going toward the expedition. Doesn't get much better than that. I don't need to make a living on it. I already make a living. It's been that way from the very beginning. Everyone else that's out there trying to piggyback on our work, they're sucking money out of the project. Don't let that happen. Stay with us. Stay with the original, the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition. We won't let you down, I promise. And don't forget, Contact in the Desert is coming up in May. All right, let's get back to it. We're talking about great stuff happening. Asteroid mining. On the wish list for the next round of Air Force SBIR bids, these are solicitations that are made to the public through grants.gov and places like that, and you can go there and you can fill out these solicitations, and you can send in your information, and if you qualify, you can get a government grant to do work for the government. And it's I've never gotten one. I've sure applied for a lot of them, but I just tell you, it's a 1 in a million shot. It's more like the lottery than anything else. But the Air Force Small Business Innovation Research Program, that's the SBIR. Supposedly, this stuff is set aside for small business, but no, small business never gets it. They've released a new list of topics for companies to submit proposals. On the wish list, yeah, you're never going to guess. You're never going to guess. Operations for beyond geosynchronous orbit near the moon's orbit. It's called CisLunar operations. Oh, yeah, it's exciting stuff. It's one of 3 space-focused areas by the Air Force Technology Accelerator known as AFWERX, AFWERX. And the proposals are due by February 11th. I'll leave the link in my notes, and we're going to provide a way for you people that are out there in the Revolution Radio Network to be able to get to my notes. We don't have it up on the website yet, but if you go to americafreeradio.com, we're going to provide a way for you to access the program notes. If you look on the left-hand side, there is a button that says Program Notes. Right now, only the Sunday programs are listed. But on January 1st, we're going to start listing the Wednesday and Sunday programs there. So the normal 1,500 pages a year that get put in there of my notes, it's going to increase to about 2,500 pages a year. That's a lot of notes, you know. We do a lot of work to put this together for you guys. As the space beyond geosynchronous orbit becomes more crowded and competitive, it's good for everybody. It's good for the companies, it's good for the government, it's good for the human race. The Air Force is seeking commercial innovation in support of space domain awareness for this CisLunar operations. In other words, the first level of the expanse is starting. The Luna community is starting. Now, specific items that the Air Force wants. You might want to write this down. Payloads for providing space domain awareness from the lunar surface. Lightweight sensors for space-based domain awareness. That means radiation. That means solar wind. That means luminescence. That means helium-3 presence. It means being able to spectrographically analyze lunar soil for things like water, oxygen, titanium, and things like that. All of that exists. We all have it on Earth. We got pretty close to that in our nose, but we can't send our nose to the moon. So you guys that are putting together these rovers and drones and things like that, start thinking low gravity and no atmosphere. The Air Force also is interested in concepts for providing position navigation and timing solutions for CisLunar space operations. See, one of the things we have here on the Earth, it's really not supposed to work, is GPS satellites. Yes, we have enough GPS satellites out there. Any one of your automobiles in between the 37th parallels or 40th parallel on Earth should be able to access up to 12 satellites, because this is the belt around the planet that the satellites exist, between the 60th parallels upper and lower. So if you get to about the 40th parallel, you got about 12 satellites that you can access, which means you can locate your position on the ground within about a meter. In fact, you could turn your GPS unit on while you're walking on the sidewalk, and it can tell you how many meters it is to the bar. That's pretty good. Now, that technology is not really supposed to exist, and here's why. Because there's a little thing called the Lorentz equations, okay? Think about this for a second. Those satellites are going around the planet at somewhere around 18,000 miles an hour, maybe a little more than that, because these are geosynchronous satellites. So they got to be whipping through space. But the Earth is also rotating on its axis. So the satellites are pretty much above the same space, right? But you are moving on the ground. and you're moving in all kinds of different directions. So when you think about it, you have a Lorentzian conflict here, because there's no way to tell velocity unless you can resolve the distance between multiple satellites, which is exactly what the mathematics does. It was a tremendous challenge. How do I know this? Because my high school friends are the ones that invented it. They put it up in space. Okay, Eugene Cercio and Jim Helsper and all my friends at Hughes Satellite put that stuff up. So while I was in the Air Force, they were putting the satellites up. And that's the story. So they've solved that problem for Earth, but we don't have that for the moon. It's 250,000 miles away. We don't have any geosynchronous satellites going around the moon. We don't have a way to tell where you are on the planet or around the planet. No way to locate. So we got to start from scratch. But we know a lot because we learned a lot doing that here on Earth. There was a lot of trial and error doing this. In the early days, you were lucky to get 1 or 2 or 3 satellites. You could get maybe within a quarter of a mile, and then it was maybe 100 meters, and then it was 15 meters, and now it's down to a meter. It's taken a long time to get here. And here's the crazy thing. A lot of those satellites, they aged out. They had to be replaced. And we're to the point now where we're supposed to be replacing them again. Of course, we're not replacing them right now. You know why? Because our atmosphere is thinner. If our atmosphere was the same thickness that it was when we put those satellites up, the orbits would have decayed by now. They would have been dragging against the atmosphere, slowing down, and thus burning up in the atmosphere. But the atmosphere is thinner. Why is it thinner? Because the sun is quiet. The sun is not putting out the particles that it normally puts out. Normally, yes, there's a solar wind, of course, but you don't have coronal mass ejections. You don't have sunspots. You don't have giant volumes of high-energy particles belching into space, picking up the solar wind, taking 73 hours or so to reach our upper atmosphere, convert into cosmic rays, absorbed by things like the ozone layer and other components in our atmosphere, hence the northern lights, but it's not building up our atmosphere. And so our atmosphere has thinned. Now that has 2 effects on us, both of which affect the climate. One of the effects is we are losing our insulative blanket between the surface and space. So when the sun goes down or when the sun goes below the horizon, it gets colder. So we get colder winters. It snows in crazy places like the Sahara Desert and Sydney, Australia. And it's snowing deeper, snowing longer, getting colder. The other thing that happens is the protective layer of the atmosphere against the sun's high energy radiation and shortwave radiation like UVC, it isn't there. That means more radiation, more infrared radiation specifically strikes the surface of the Earth. What does that mean? It means it gets hotter in the summertime. When the sun is on our side of the equator, it heats us up more. We're getting hotter, longer summers. More days over 90 degrees, more days over 95 degrees. But do you realize that this last February of 2019 was the coldest February in history for Los Angeles? Yeah, the coldest February in history. Do you know it did not get over 70 degrees for 1 minute in February of 2019? That's never happened before, ever since temperature's been recorded. That's where climate change is happening. That's why we're breaking records in the winter. That's why we're breaking records in the summer. That's why. Because those particles are not there. That's why the GPS satellites don't have to be replaced for another 10 years. Because they're not dragging against the atmosphere. The atmosphere isn't reaching out as far as it normally does. Believe it or not, components of our atmosphere reach all the way to the moon. They're very light, not very dense. That is to say, they're very diffused out, spread out over space, but the atmosphere of Earth stretches all the way to the moon. Fortunately, that doesn't really cause a lot of problems. Some of it gets packed around the magnetosphere, and some of it actually resides around the moon itself. But think of the infrastructure. We have to have CisLunar position satellites in order to be able to accurately and precisely, there's a difference, accuracy is how close you are to the bullseye, and precision is the number of times you're close to the bullseye. Precision we call grouping. Accuracy is what we call bullseye. Okay, so now you know the difference. Those opportunities are available, and these satellites do not have to be big. They can be CubeSats, which are basically drink coolers with solar panels on them. Yeah, it can be done. Now, the other thing here, let's see, payloads, domain awareness, methodologies for orbit determination and catalog maintenance. We want to do this right. One of the problems we have around the Earth right now is there's a lot of junk up there. I mean, there's a lot of old satellites that don't work anymore, but they're still up there whipping around the planet at 16, 17, 18, 20,000 miles an hour. You know how much energy an ice cube has at 18,000 miles an hour? A lot. If it strikes your satellite, it's the last thing that will ever happen to it. And then when your satellite goes flying apart into a gazillion different pieces, those pieces create debris, and it's a big chain reaction. If we had it to do over again, if we would never have put a satellite up until we knew what we were doing now, we wouldn't have this mess. We would not have the big traffic jam that we have up there in space right now. But unfortunately, in 1957 or so, we started putting satellites up. And they had batteries in them that didn't last. They had fuel systems in them that didn't last. They had radios in them and tubes and different things they didn't last. They went bust. And unfortunately, we don't have Salvage One. We don't have a pooper scooper going up there, picking up all these defunct satellites and bringing them back to Earth for recycling. Well, there are 3 problems with it. The first problem is, hey, you ain't scooping up my satellite because you don't know what my satellite's been doing up there. You're not getting my optics. You're not getting my proprietary fuel system. You see what I'm saying? There's that. There's ownership. The other is, well, what happens if you mess up? I mean, what happens if you go to pick the satellite up and you miss it and you kind of bump it and it goes veering off and bangs into another satellite? What happens if your ship isn't as good as you think it is and it has an emergency up there and it starts banging into stuff? So we have liability. So we have proprietary stuff, we got liability, and there's a third. And the third is a lot of those satellites are military. And even though they're quiet, even though they're not doing anything, right now it doesn't mean much because they can be turned on. And maybe some of them are doomsday devices. They're bombs up there and you could set it off, blow it up, and it would wipe out everybody's communication. North Korea has 2 satellites up there, 2 of them. Pretty amazing, huh? That they can't even get a rocket to make it past the Sea of Japan, but they can put 2 satellites in orbit. First try, both times. Yeah, we know how they did that too, because the technology to do that was sold to them. And we also know that the North Koreans are masters of microelectronics. Hell, they've got a sequestered place to be able to do all this research on their own, right? Nobody's looking over their shoulder. China's not looking over their shoulder. We don't have spies in there. They can do whatever they want to do. So there are military ramifications. So you got accidents, you got proprietariness, and you have military applications. Not going to be an easy thing to clean up all this space junk. So this brings us to the CisLunar space. Remember I told you in the last segment, he who controls the moon controls the Earth. First one there Well, I won't say the first one there wins, because the first one there might do it wrong. They might be sitting on the moon and be out of gas. You know, the Indians just sent their craft up there a couple of weeks ago, well, a couple of months ago now, but it did really well, right? It launched, it went into orbit around Earth for 18 days, it passed all of its tests, everything was cool, left Earth's orbit, went to the moon, all that was good, made it to the moon, made its trajectory to land on the moon, and then it splatted. Why? Well, they didn't tell you in the news, but they didn't have enough retro rockets on this thing. No, they had enough retro power, but remember I was telling you about the hydrazine that's kind of puffed into the catalytic converter, and poof, it puffs out, and that creates a thrust? Well, that's basically the fuel that you have for a retro rocket. But you can oversize these things. You can't control that. Once it puffs that hydrazine into the catalytic converter, it's gonna explode to gas right away, and there's no throttling it. So what happened is the little beggar. Let's use this thing. I like my little R2D2. See, everybody should have one of these on their desk. So the little beggar was coming in, and it got lined up, and the retro rockets fired, and they overfired, and they took the craft up too high. Now the distance is too far. They don't have enough fuel for the smaller retro rockets, and it came back down, going too far of a distance. The small rockets fired, not enough, and it splatted on the surface. Left a nice white spot on the ground. Done. You need more retro rockets, all small ones, so you can fire them and control your descent to the ground with this vernier control. That's what I'm saying. Not enough practice. We don't have enough data, and we're not sharing the data one to another. I could just see the guys at NASA going, well, I guess we should have told them about that equation, huh? Well, they'll figure it out next time on their own. Meanwhile, they spent a lot of money getting up there. They learned a lot, but they didn't succeed. Same thing with China. So the point is, there's a lot of competition for getting to this space. And we only have governments competing. And that's the wrong way to go about it. What we need is you and me and the guy down the street. We need all of us competing. And then we take the best idea and we give it a try. So we get these methodologies for orbit determination. We catalog it so that we share the information in CisLunar space, and then we're able to do it the first time much smarter. We don't have a lot of space junk orbiting around the moon that doesn't work, and we're able to capture the moon for mankind. The Air Force is interested in concepts for providing the position, navigation, timing solutions, visualization of CisLunar orbits, terrestrial-based concepts for achieving space domain awareness of CisLunar space, the inclusion of CisLunar space capabilities in this SBIR. That's what I was talking to you about, the Small Business Initiative. The program was unexpected. Let's see here. The industry sees this as a sign that the Air Force and the future Space Force are responding to advances made by China. And that's what competition does, especially when your competitor does not have your best interests at heart. It's the one thing when Ford and Chevy compete. It's another when, Tesla Motors and EV Fleet compete. We had our truck 5 years ago. It's a better truck. It's more affordable. It's more practical. Did we have the money? No. Does Tesla have the money? Yes. So who gets the hype? Well, the Cybertruck does. The Rivian does. Other truck companies. The difference is that we're competing against Ford. We're competing against BMW. We're competing against Tata, the big Indian manufacturer. We're not competing against governments. When governments compete with one another, people die. So the industry sees this as a sign that the Air Force and the future Space Force have to respond to this advance by China. Okay? The Air Force is seeking technologies to improve the performance of small satellites, according to the pre-solicitation. Why? Because there's safety in numbers. If you can create 30 small satellites and put them in the cargo bay of a launch vehicle, and you can deploy 30 satellites targeted, you get one technology into lunar orbit all at one time. It works. You don't have to put one big satellite, and then what are you going to accomplish with that? Not much. But if you have 30, now you've got a way to create a grid of some kind, and you can really make advances with it. The small satellites are valuable to the military because they can be manufactured and launched quickly, but the performance of the components and the buses needs to be higher. And that's why this AFWERX pre-solicitation is out there, because they know where the smart ideas are. They're in your basement. They're in your attic. They're in your lab notebook sitting back there on the bookshelf. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. You want them? Let's talk. Money. The Air Force wants these high power energy generation and storage concepts, onboard processing, broadband communication antennas, software refined radios. You know, you don't have to have a radio anymore. You can have software put on your computer. Yeah, you know, I have a spectrometer, an oscilloscope on my computer. It just has the effector, or the actual sensor on the outside, the I/O, goes straight in through USB, accesses the software, boom. I have a oscilloscope on my computer. Now they have software-based radios. It's all digital. Advanced attitude control sensors, thermal control systems, advanced manufacturing technologies like inkjet printers or 3D printers. Let's put it that way. Let's suppose you could build a gantry style, that is hanging overhead, a gantry style 3D printer on the moon that was 100 feet square. And what you shoveled into it was lunar soil. And you either electrically or chemically treated that soil and turned it into some kind of goop that the 3D printer could chug out on the ground. And it could go back and forth, or around and around this 100-foot grid, and it could build a 100-foot by 100-foot building, say 50 feet tall, with a roof and everything, like a cube on the ground. Yeah. Suppose the walls were 6 feet thick, 8 feet thick. And then you went up and you cut holes into it for windows and doors, and you put airlocks into the walls. And then you went on the inside of this thing that you just 3D printed on the surface of the moon, or in a crater of a moon, or in a lunar event somewhere, and you pressurized it to, say, 4 or 5 pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure for something that large. But at that pressure, that's not atmospheric pressure on the surface, but it is atmospheric pressure at about 8,000 feet. You can survive at 8,000 feet easy. You do it all the time when you take a plane ride. The interior of that plane is at about 6,000 feet. That's why your ears pop when you go up. That's not sea level inside that aluminum can. No, the plane may be at 30,000 feet, but the inside of the plane is at about 6,000 feet. That's not the difference of very much poundage inside and out. It's enough to keep you breathing and you don't pass out, but you probably couldn't stay conscious at 30,000 feet, not for very long. You'd need oxygen, but you could survive. If you had oxygen, you don't need a pressure suit or anything like that. The point is, you could create an atmosphere on the inside of this, and now you have a working space on the moon with walls that are made of lunar soil 8 feet thick, and you built it with a 3D printer. See, all that technology exists. It exists right now, today, but it ain't on the moon. And what they want are the proposals to be able to put that up there. The third space-related topic on the list is ubiquitous satellite command control operations. This is something of an anomaly, because the last thing in the world you want to do is to build all this stuff and then have some Johnny-come-lately go up, hack it all, and just take it over, right? So a hybrid architecture of geo spacecraft, distributed small satellite networks in multiple orbits, creates a complex command and control challenge for future Air Force missions. As these networks grow, traditional human in-the-loop operations becomes cumbersome, if not impossible. We're seeking technologies that enable rapid, ubiquitous command and control of satellite constellations that also support rapid operator decision-making. We don't want to have to say, Houston, we have a problem, and then wait 8 minutes for a response. It ain't going to happen. It needs to happen right now. I need to be able to access it off my cell phone. By the way, if you look at the Expanse, you'll see the future of cell phone technology too. It's very cool stuff. A lot of texting, a lot of sending, and it takes time for a message to get back and forth, but very cool technology. You should watch The Expanse. It's on Amazon. In between episodes of The Mandalorian, episode 7's already out. By the way, can I see by a show of hands how many people have bought their tickets for Star Wars this weekend? Well, you can't, because I bought the last seat at IMAX. Yes, I did. I'm going opening night, IMAX. I got the last seat in the place. I had to buy it in advance. No, I didn't pay off anybody. I bought it because and I'll probably see it 2 or 3 more times, maybe not IMAX, but I got other friends that weren't so lucky, so I get to see it again. So AFWorks started the SBIR program actually in 2017. It hasn't gone very many places because people don't really have the resources to be able to respond. 2017, you recall, the economy was still kind of on its butt. We've recovered a lot since 2017. We've added about, $5 trillion to the stock market. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said that she got her 401k, her 401k statement, how they send you that thing. And I mean, for years and years and years, I didn't look at it because it was too freaking depressing to see how much money it had lost during the Obama administration, back when the Democrats were running things. She made $50,000 on her 401k in 2019. Not bad, eh? I'd say Mr. Donald Trump was the right man for the job, don't you? Oh, yes, I know. 23 radical Democrats took over the party. They vomited lies 24 hours a day. They forced a quid quo pro on all the other Democrats, which is basically, you vote yes, or you get no money to run for re-election. Of course, they were stupid, and they believed it, because it don't matter how much money they pour in. All those people are losing their jobs in November. All of them. We just witnessed tonight the suicide of the DNC. It's done, because in November, all those people are going to be voted out of office. And guess what? A lot of them are freshmen. You know what that means? No pension for you. No pension. You have to serve 5 years in Congress before you're eligible for a pension. That's right. You're going to go back to being a bartender. Exactly. School teacher too. Yes. And a doctor. There's a couple doctors. Got to go back to, treating whatever it is you were treating. Back to the grind. No more congressional cafeteria for you. You're done. And by the way, while they're doing that in Washington and, lauding themselves and patting themselves on the back, and tonight they're going to go get hammered and stoned because they just impeached the MFer. In Michigan, 50,000 people are rocking it, and they're excited about throwing Rashida Tlaib out of office in November. They are pumped about saying goodbye to Ilhan Omar and goodbye to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. All of them will be gone in November. It's a wonderful thing. A little dangerous to have a one-party system. I think we will for a while. But by the way, if any of you out there are thinking about forming a new political party, I think maybe a Constitution party, I don't know, a Green Asphalt party, Captain Crunch party, vastly superior to the piece of crap we've been calling the DNC since 1848. Good riddance as far as I'm concerned. So in the open topics SBIR, the Air Force offers 2-to-1 fund matching. That means, and this is up to $1.5 million. That means if you put up $100,000, they'll put up $200,000. That's pretty good. What? No, no, I'm sorry. You can't just go in with an idea and, a drawing on your lab notebook and say, hey, can I have $5 million? I'm pretty sure I could finish the technology. No, it's called matching. You come up with part of the money first, and then you submit invoices as you complete the work, and they will pay you 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. So if you turn in an invoice for $50,000, they will write you a check for $150,000. But first, you got to spend the $50,000. You got to do the work. And when you turn that invoice in, listen, don't be like the former mayor of Baltimore. No. Don't turn in an invoice for $800,000 for writing children's books, Healthy Holly books, and getting paid $800,000 to your foundation, which has all of one employee, which is you. Yeah, because you're going to go to jail if you do that. So don't try that. Don't try that. First, you come up with the money, and then you turn in your invoice, and then they'll pay you. And by the way, don't be real political about it, because if you are, they're going to starve you to death, just like they did Elon Musk. When Elon Musk took over Tesla Motors, he applied for a low-interest loan in 2009, and he received it, about $70 million. It was pretty good, low-interest loan. But so what he would do is he would spend the money, and then he would turn in the invoice to get the money from the loan, and the Department of Energy was slow walking those payments. Months they sat on those invoices. And you know what happened? Tesla Motors got right on its last breath. It was about dead. And as if that wasn't enough, Citigroup and some of the other big banks were shorting the crap out of Tesla Motors stock. So Tesla Motors went down to about $20 a share, maybe $18 a share. I had friends that bought into that reverse merger, and they were complaining. They were dying. The company was going to be delisted, finished, finito. Except Elon Musk was smarter than they were. Put out a little press release that the car was actually doing better than it was designed. The stock bumped just a little bit, caught the short traders unable to deliver stock. And as the rules go, Citicorp had to go out and find that stock because it didn't exist. They created it out of nothing. It's called naked short trading. And they couldn't find it anywhere except on the market. So they had to buy it. And when they did, the price shot through the roof. And as it was shooting through the roof, Elon Musk fed more treasury stock into the market. Not only did Citigroup get burned over $1 billion, but Tesla Motors was able to raise an extra $350 million straight off the market. And what's the first thing good old Elon Musk did? Yep, he paid off that low-interest loan at the Department of Energy and told them to stick that loan up their ass. And that's the only way Tesla Motors survived. We praise him for it. He's great. Electric vehicles would not exist if it wasn't for Elon Musk. He did a great job. He doesn't know a whole lot about selling cars, but the man knows about selling stock. I will give that to him. Now, the holy grail for companies in this Air Force SBIR is actually the Phase 3 award. Now, listen up. This is a little different because not so much competition here, okay? This is a sole source contract. That means you have a special idea that only you have, and they will give you what's called a sole source contract to procure the product that the company designed and prototyped with the Phase 1 and Phase 2 funding. So you get there and you get the sole source funding. That's the holy grail. Now you have accessed money that no one else can access. And this has been done a couple times. Let me give you one project. And I kind of talked a little bit about this on Sunday. And I talked about it last Wednesday and didn't finish it. So you had to kind of listen to Sunday's program to get the rest of it. And that's a little program called the X-37B. Now, the X-37B was one of these kind of SBIRs. It was a mini unmanned space shuttle. Not very long. Has a payload bay about the size of my pickup truck, about 7 feet long. That's it. Can carry a lot of weight, but can't carry a lot of stuff. And it's unmanned. So NASA started on it, and they got it just so far. And, of course, the budget got cut because of the food stamp program. Sorry to say, but that's what it was. And so rather than scrap the idea of the X-37B, the Air Force stepped in. Now, the Air Force is government, but it ain't government. It's not NASA government with a bunch of bureaucrats looking over your shoulder. It's government with a lot of brass looking over your shoulder. So they picked up the X-37B and they put it in their expedited program, which means a little bit of good money, a little bit of bad money, a whole lot of money that doesn't really show up on the books, and boom, the X-37B was finished, launched, and ran a mission. It's now run 5, officially. And we have more than one, I'm pretty darn sure. Some of these missions have been up to a year. One of them was over 700 days. That's a long time to be in space. Don't have to worry much about it because there's no human inside of it. But here's what we don't know. We don't know what the X-37B does. Yes, we know it can go up into space, and we know that the little beggar can change orbits. It can go up, it can go down, it can go faster or slower around the planet. It has a lot of mobility up there. It's moved around between satellites, and sometimes we can track it, and sometimes we can't because we think it's going to come around, and it doesn't come around because it changed orbit while it was over on the other side of the planet, and it's a pretty elusive little beggar. The other thing we don't know is what was in the cargo bay. They're not saying. We don't know if it was instruments, if it was weapons, if it took something up and brought something back, or if it took whatever it took up and brought that back. We don't know. We don't know if it picked up other satellites or if it took satellites up or if it had some kind of weapon system on it. But that's how that program came to be. Now, I can tell you, the team that put that X-37B together, they got them some little red Corvettes out of that. And that could be you, because there's way more than that. It's almost unlimited what is out there. And remember, the space between 23,500 miles above Earth, which is basically where all the geosynchronous satellites sit, the ones that you're listening to right now, that's where they sit. And the ones that my friend Eugene Cercio has out there, that's where they sit. But beyond that, we don't have much. We don't have much around the moon. We got stuff around Mars. We got stuff around Venus, around Saturn, around Jupiter, around Uranus. Yes, all that. But not so much around the moon. And I will say this again. He who controls the moon controls the Earth. Let's see if there's anything interesting here in the chat room. The evolution of conscious matrix and cracking the genetic code. Okay, I understand the genetic code. I don't know about the evolution conscious matrix. I know a little bit about that, but I don't know much that anyone has the absolute solution to that. So don't know much about that book. Let's see. Oh, Zaid's out there. Good to see you. He says, "Hey Brooks, glad to be back. Nice to have you. Let me ask you, do you think it's worth it if the opportunity is presented to go to one of the Gulf states in the Middle East and make your that's a misspelling, I think. Make your worth there versus making it in the U.S. I don't think there's any place like the U.S. because you have pretty much total control over everything you do here. You can rent a building, you can find employees, you can find all the raw materials you need right here, and you don't have to worry about it being nationalized. You don't have to worry about being blown up. You don't have to worry about have some polonium dropped in your martini. I think that you are pretty safe here. Anything that you want to do here depends on how public you want to be. If you go out there and do webinars every week about what you're doing, you're probably going to have some visitors. You stay in your little 20,000 square foot shop in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of the city and don't tell anybody what you're doing inside and out there till you're ready to unveil it, you can do pretty much anything you want to do. Now, I will tell you this. All the great ideas, all the great changes that happen to the earth start with one person, not with a group, not with a school, not with a company, not with any kind of clan or club or tribe. One person. One person, and that's you. If you got that idea, you can change the world. Now, I will say this about engineering because I've been an engineer my entire life since I was probably 10 years old. 50% of engineering is engineering. You have to know how to draw. You have to know how to do math. You have to know how to be multidisciplinary, weld, hammer, fit concrete, wire, get burnt, make stuff. The other 50% of engineering is sales. If you don't know how to sell your idea, it ain't going nowhere. You know how I know this? I got 3 electric trucks sitting right outside. They're the finest electric trucks in the entire country. They're fast, they're affordable, they're safer than any truck that's ever been built. They can carry 1,000 pounds, 150 miles for less than $2. Yeah. You know when I built them? I built them 5 years ago. You know how many times I've put a wrench to them in 5 years? None. They're reliable. They have lifetime warranties on them. You can drive them as far as you can drive them in a lifetime, and I will warranty them. But I can't sell. Sorry to say. I can design the trucks. I got the website. I've given thousands of test drives to hundreds of companies, hundreds of municipalities. But I'm not building those trucks because I don't have the money. I can't sell the investors. 50% of engineering is engineering. The other 50% is sales. Just make sure of this. Make sure you're not all sales and no engineering. There's plenty of that out there. In fact, this chat room's got several bits of it right in there right now. In fact, I could probably go to my inbox right now. I got so much stuff in my spam box, it would choke a horse. All of it sales, none of it engineering. Engineering first, and then the sales. Yes, that would be good. If I could have a partner that could sell while I do the engineering, man, that would be great. So far, haven't found them. Haven't found them. You're very welcome, Zaid. He uses, "Thanks, Brooks. That makes me feel great." You're very welcome. You're welcome here anytime. Tell a friend about us. We're here every Wednesday night because this is the Revolution Radio Network, and I'm Brooks Agnew, and my program is called America Free Radio. You can come here anytime. It will never cost you a dime to come here. You can write me easily at bagnew@x2-radio.com. bagnew@x2-radio.com. I'll put it in my notes at the bottom of the YouTube. If you want to participate in the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition right now, it is free. All you have to do is go to npiee.com. I'll put that link up there one more time. Make sure that I grab it here. It is. Put it up there one more time. npiee.com. Fill out the form, and you're in. You'll receive a regular newsletter 2, 3, 4 times a month. We'll keep you abreast of everything we're doing. And in January, we're going to start uploading the videos. Myself and Brad Olson, the great intrepid explorer of the Antarctic. So now you have the Arctic Explorer, you have the Antarctic Explorer, and we are going to take the whole world with us. What we see, you will see. I can promise you that. We'll see you right here next week on America Free Radio on the Revolution Radio Network. Tell your friends about us. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn the notifications on. So next time we go live, you'll know about it. And then tell your friends about it. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone. We won't be here next Wednesday because that's Christmas Day. Have a Merry Christmas. Go out and look for the good in others and help it to grow a little every day. And before long, you will have saved the planet. My name is Brooks Agnew. This is America Free Radio saying peace, Earth Explorers.